So we are here at OpenStack Summit in Sydney, and today we have with us Boris Renski, who is the CMO and co-founder of Migrantis.
Yes.
Boris, if you look at the evolution of OpenStack from the very early on, there used to be integrated release, then there was Big Tent, then last year the focus was on composability, and this year it's more about open and collaboration. So before we move into open, can you talk about this evolution? How do you see this evolution of OpenStack?
Yeah, I can. So I think that since the very beginning, there was kind of a struggle in the OpenStack community and the OpenStack Foundation to differentiate between OpenStack as the community and the foundation, and OpenStack as the product. And the issues manifested itself in a whole bunch of different projects that, in some instances, only peripherally were related to OpenStack being started, but because OpenStack Foundation, the governance structure is such that it's all about the core OpenStack, those projects were required to somehow prove their value in OpenStack context, integrate with OpenStack, kind of report into the OpenStack technical committee, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole bunch of projects like Barbican or Designate, for instance, that are definitely value add to things like Nova and Glance, but they don't necessarily have to be like exclusively OpenStack focused. Like Ironic is another example, right? Like you can run Ironic without Nova. And the foundation always struggled, like how, on one hand, it's a very competent team, it's a great community, and there is a strong desire to leverage that team and community to promote the open source innovators. On the other hand, because OpenStack is not just a community, but it's also kind of a product, and people perceive it as a product, there's always this question of like, how do you, on one hand, promote all of these innovative open source projects that potentially value add outside of OpenStack context, but still kind of solve for the the structural issue of anything that's under the OpenStack umbrella having to very tightly integrate with core OpenStack projects and be value add for OpenStack specifically. And I think that the evolution that you're asking about of like Big Tent, composability, integration, etc., were all attempts to kind of like solve for that, right? On the one hand, preclude OpenStack software, like the OpenStack product, from becoming too broad and kind of maintaining the focus on the core, and at the same time also allow for the foundation staff, foundation team, which I personally believe is the best in the world team for building open source mindshare, to spend cycles on promoting other open source projects that are not necessarily tightly related to OpenStack. And what I'm personally excited about this summit the most is that I feel that we finally have a good solution where we kind of put really kind of a cards on the table and said, hey, okay, OpenStack is a product. We can put OpenStack as a product into the data center computing category, and then we'll also allow Foundation to potentially invite other communities, other projects under the Foundation umbrella to be run under potentially different governance, to be approved by the board, of course, but without this requirement for these projects to specifically necessarily integrate with OpenStack, report to the OpenStack TC, etc. And today was the first time where actually the solution is clean. All of the other solutions around composability and Big Tent were kind of like awkward, middle of the way solutions in my view. Whereas at the last board meeting, we finally kind of tackled the issue head on, and I'm really kind of excited that finally we can kind of separate like OpenStack as product and Foundation as a separate thing that can promote potentially other very innovative open source projects.
So what you're saying is that's what it should have been from the very beginning kind of way. That should have been the approach.
I think it shouldn't necessarily happen from like day one,
Right.
but as soon as the community has grown to the point where there was a lot of innovators that wanted to be part of the community, but did not necessarily want to kind of shackle their innovation to the use case of the OpenStack product exclusively, which probably started happening 2-3 years into the OpenStack's life. We should have gone and done this. It took too long, but yes.
Finally is here. This year the theme is more around open, and collaboration, because nobody runs, just the OpenStack cloud. There are so many other components that people run.
Right.
So first of all, what is your kind of perception, or kind of your perspective on this year's big announcement, which is open and collaborate? What do you how do you look at it?
Yeah, so collaboration is great and all, but and I think that there's a lot already happening in via OpenStack Foundation to facilitate that collaboration. I feel that perhaps maybe it's just me personally getting overexcited about the wrong thing, but I feel that this whole kind of integration collaboration story is a roundabout way on behalf of the community to actually come out and say that, yeah, we're going to separate the notion of OpenStack product and OpenStack Foundation as an engine for promoting open source software, and we're going to go ahead and open ourselves up to actually work with other non-OpenStack projects. And of course it's good for integration, collaboration, yada, 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 but I feel that for me personally, like the central message is not about this collaboration and integration. For me personally, the central message, what I talked about before, it's that, hey, OpenStack Foundation can invite other communities to come in and participate under the OpenStack Foundation umbrella potentially, under different governance model. And of course it's good for collaboration and integration, but that's kind of like, the second level of messaging, so to speak, at least in my head.
So, but when you look at when you talk about other communities, or other projects, what kind of projects are these? Because when I look at Kubernetes or a lot of other things which are already under the umbrella of the Linux Foundation.
Yeah.
So how do you see this going to work?
So I think that the foundation has come up with a good framework around kind of the strategic focus areas, as they call them, or governance namespaces, so to speak. For the different things that could be housed under the OpenStack Foundation umbrella. Data center computing being the traditional OpenStack, but then there's edge computing, container, I don't remember the name exactly, kind of a governance namespace, and CI/CD namespace. Within each of these categories, I think that there is a lot of projects and a lot of innovation happening that don't belong to any foundation today. And people have been asking me, like if I was, kind of the OpenStack Foundation god and had the right to like pick any project from anywhere, like where would you look, right? So there are 3 areas where one could look, I think. One area is the Netflix OSS collection of projects, for instance. So Netflix OSS there's a lot of good stuff there, but Netflix has never been very big on specifically building communities around their projects. They do, ridiculously valuable work that they open source, but building community is not something that they want to focus on. And there's a whole bunch of things in there that I think could make an excellent candidate to join the new governance namespace in the OpenStack Foundation. Another area to dig is the so-called Google Stack projects, of which, of course, like the anchor project historically for CNCF has been Kubernetes. But if you look at the recent track record, Google has been pushing out a lot of the open source projects, all designed primarily around this multi-cloud use case. How do you go multi-cloud first? Like for instance, there's a lot of noise around Istio. There's another project focusing on like continuous governance management. I forgot the name, and they keep popping them out. So I think any of those potentially could be good candidate to be placed under the container governance namespace. And another thing, kind of third area, is some of the projects that are managed by Docker right now. Right, there's a whole bunch of projects that Docker as a company is doing, and some of them, to my knowledge, don't necessarily have a very broad community outside of Docker, and because of frankly, a semi-competitive situation between Docker Swarm and Kubernetes and CNCF, some of those projects are just like Docker managed. So some of those could potentially be a candidate for coming under the OpenStack Foundation umbrella as well. So there's many areas to dig. Plus, I'm not talking about a gazillion other smaller kind of niche open source projects that are out there that could be good candidates that could benefit enormously from the kind of mind share and community building boost that the OpenStack Foundation is capable of delivering.
Right. So now we talked about from the technology point of view a bit. Let's talk about the ecosystem, like Mirantis. You're one of you have transformed yourself from pure play company to totally.
Yeah.
In the last time when we talked, from that point to this point, how has the market dynamics changed, or how Mirantis has evolved as the market? Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, of course. So. We haven't evolved too much since the last time we talked. It would be, to some extent, not a good thing if we evolve every 6 months. Makes it hard to sell to the enterprise. So we are still very much about managed open cloud. So as far as the kind of a background there, our evolution followed the following curve. We started out as an OpenStack services company, then we built an OpenStack distribution, and our approach to distribution initially was kind of a, like a single downloadable artifact, monolithic type distribution, where you have Fuel, that's our OpenStack installer, that installs OpenStack. We, about 2 years ago, realized that the challenge is not in so much, installing OpenStack, but more around the continuous lifecycle management of OpenStack. And we've decoupled and refactored our kind of a Fuel installer into a different tool called Drivetrain that employs continuous delivery pattern to actually deploy and then later lifecycle OpenStack. And most of our R&D investment, as we moved from this hardcore focus on the software distribution to more on a managed open cloud delivery, most of the product R&D went into this continuous delivery toolchain, which we call Drivetrain. That's initially been designed to deploy and lifecycle OpenStack. Earlier this year, we've added kind of a multi-cloud open container as a service platform based on Kubernetes that we can also lifecycle, deploy, update, etc. through Drivetrain. And down the road, potentially, that could expand into other things. But I think that the core leverage, the core value add that we can bring to customers is this notion of how do you do day two operations with minimum involvement of a human through this intelligent continuous delivery of various open source artifacts that you need to glue together and then lifecycle continuously for the customers to be able to consume them effectively. So that's kind of our curve of evolution, and we're sticking with that path.
While we are talking about evolution, and one thing you mentioned was the least possible human intervention, and most of the things are intelligence. And there are two keywords that I've been hearing a lot this year. One is machine learning, and one is edge.
Yeah.
So what role is machine learning going to play? I'm not talking about OpenStack powering machine learning. But I'm talking about how machine learning will benefit OpenStack. From your perspective.
So there is kind of like an aspirational kind of visionary idea that we kind of been toying around with internally also. But I don't know how immediately applicable it is to what we do with OpenStack and Kubernetes-based CAS, but the general premise is as follows. So we have the continuous delivery pipeline, our Drivetrain, and ideally when you're deploying software artifacts to production, you kind of recalibrate your deployment strategies based on the metrics about the production environment. So if you're doing a canary deployment and you've funneled 2% of your traffic to the new updated environment, and then you're measuring and you're seeing if anything's happening, anything wrong, then you technically could apply some machine learning algorithm to actually see if we need to maybe roll things back or roll things forward faster. And there is a whole kind of ecosystem of companies that are pushing stuff in this direction now. I think that's more of, in our view, a little bit like 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now type thing in terms of being able to derive actual value. I think most of the kind of decisions around how you promote software artifacts down the continuous delivery pipeline are still based on more of a kind of hard-coded algorithms than some sort of AI guiding the whole thing. But definitely there is a consensus emerging in the industry, and the super advanced guys like the Netflixes of the world that have perfected this continuous delivery paradigm are already benefiting from applying machine learning to driving artifacts from initial development to production using machine learning to make the decisions of how you kind of push them through. So that could apply, but I can't say that we're like machine learning company and doing this. So.
Right. One last question before we wrap up is edge computing. They came up with a new user survey. So it could be two-fold question. The first fold question is: do you see any new use cases or new users, kind of users that you think company like Mirantis will be catering to? And second is what scope do you see for the edge computing?
So we are definitely exploring edge. I think that there is a whole bunch of interesting stuff happening both on kind of the edge provider side as well as the edge consumer side. And in our case, we work with a lot of telcos and large kind of telco OEMs like Ericsson. So all of them are prepping for 5G, and all of them are starting to explore various architectures that would enable them to deliver edge computing capability to host VNFs on the edge or just general purpose compute on the edge, which requires naturally completely different kind of deployment footprint for OpenStack or Kubernetes or whatever it is that you use as the underlying fabric at the edge. So we are working with the service providers and our partners in the space on that side, and at the same time we're also working with some of the potential consumers of the edge, such as Volkswagen has been a big customer of ours for a long time, and naturally, everybody believes that self-driving cars are imminent, and they will be one of the drivers of the adoption of the edge. So we're also working with the customers to kind of understand better the customer perspective and their needs with respect to what are some of those edge architectures are going to look like and how that's going to impact some of the technologies such as OpenStack. So that work's ongoing, but having said that, I can't say that we're actively involved in deploying edge infrastructure for any particular customer right now. It's still mostly POC pilot, thought leadership stuff that's going back and forth between the service providers and the customers.
Thanks, Boris. As usual, it was a very thought-provoking conversation. Hopefully, we'll see you again at the next OpenStack Summit. And back to our audiences, thanks for being with us today. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and see you again next time. Bye from now.